Now turn to Section 1. Section 1. First, you have some time to look at questions 1 to 6. Now we shall begin. You should answer the questions as you listen because you will not hear the recording a second time. Listen carefully and answer questions 1 to 6.
Now, a key issue in the ability of cities to grow is the question of housing. However, quality is as important as quantity here. But that isn't to say that this is easy to guarantee, and the development, or at least the spread, of many modern cities is marked by the sprawl of slum or shantytown housing. Governments are, of course, keen to address this, but the tendency to demolish them has often proved disastrous, as it doesn't solve the problem unless satisfactory replacements are ready for the inhabitants. What I'm saying is that suitable housing projects have to be lined up to accommodate these otherwise displaced people. And suitable is the key word here. All too frequently, there isn't real consultation, only token gestures. If the residents aren't fully involved, they are unlikely to find the resulting development appropriate to their needs. People need to feel reasonably independent, and strategies for providing accommodation schemes work much better if an approach rooted in self-help is applied. People value things more when they have been part of bringing them into being. At the same time, residents can't do everything for themselves, or not well enough anyway, and so governments need to accept that a number of services will always have to be laid on. These would include electricity and water and so on. From the other side, residents need to feel able to commit. Migrants are essential to the growth of cities, bringing rapid increases in population, skills, and income. But they need to have a sense of security, of long-term commitment to the city, if they are to invest money in building or buying houses. Developing this sense of commitment isn't straightforward, and it takes time. It's complex and involves several factors. People need to feel they belong, and unfortunately too many governments fail to appreciate that community values are a crucial component of that. Sadly, there are too many housing schemes which don't work. People drift away, or the whole place becomes crime-ridden.
Before you hear the rest of the conversation, you have some time to look at questions 7 to 10. Now listen and answer questions 7 to 10.
It's easy to be wise after the event, but it is worrying that a lot of housing is put up without analysis having been carried out to examine how much employment is going to be available for people. But I don't want to labour the negatives too hard. Such difficulties as there are challenges, and challenges that can be, and often are, overcome. And cities are, I believe, a good thing. Urbanization, the process of developing cities and the societies that comprise them, may not be everyone's dream, but it has a huge impact on the economy, and also benefits each and every person's freedom. Furthermore, the sheer volume of people means that work can be differently distributed. In villages, people need to be multi-skilled in order to be autonomous, but in cities, You can see the evolution of a variety of specialist activities, and this means people live in a more sophisticated way. It's not only tangible phenomena. There are all sorts of other equally important benefits too. Residing in cities brings us face to face with many different ways of thinking or going about things, and this increases our degree of understanding, something which is hard to measure in scientific terms, but which surely makes better people of us all. Right, well, now I'd like to turn our attention to the suburbs.
That is the end of section 1. You now have half a minute to check your answers. Now turn to section 2. Section 2. First, you have some time to look at questions 11 to 15. Now listen carefully and answer questions 11 to 15.
Now, balloons and airships are worth consideration because while on the one hand they represent humans' first successes at air flight, after centuries of less than successful theory and experimentation, they also, on the other hand, continue to be used today. We may have appeared to have moved on to jet planes and space rockets, but you can still see these more primitive flyers in the skies. OK, gas balloons first. France saw the first balloon flight in 1783, and this began a process of development. By 1862, in the Civil War in the United States, we find Thaddeus Lowe replacing spies with balloons to go behind enemy lines. The success of this led to the continued use of balloons in peacetime, and they were employed in the creation of maps. And such applications continue to this day, with balloons assisting in increasing our knowledge and understanding of the world we live in. Unmanned balloons are still widely used to collect data to inform scientific research of various kinds. You'd be surprised at how much they contribute. All sorts of instruments can be mounted in a balloon, and ongoing investigations into climate benefit from the information that can be gathered from a flight. Well, that's gas balloons. Now, the increase in the popularity of ballooning as a sport or leisure activity has been mainly due to the development of the modern hot air balloon, being cheaper and safer than the gas balloon. Heating air, rather than using potentially explosive gas, is what makes these rise, although the process doesn't generate as much lift as with gas balloons. But this is a small price to pay for its other benefits, and this type of balloon is no doubt here to stay.
Before you hear the rest of the talk, you have some time to look at questions 16 to 20. Now listen and answer questions 16 to 20.
Airships are also fairly old in their origins. The idea for a balloon that could be powered and steered was first published in France in 1784, although 1852 was the date of the first successful airship flight. The first airships, like the first aircraft, didn't provide any weather protection for their crew, so it must have been rather uncomfortable up there. But designs continued to develop in sophistication. It was realised that the ships would drift about if they weren't strengthened, and that to work effectively, they would have to have a framework. Once designs started incorporating this, flights became longer and more reliable. Airships were deployed for various uses in the First World War, and once peace returned, designers began to turn their attention to ambitious plans for regular intercontinental flights. However, in the 1930s, this program more or less came to an end. For one thing, the speed and popularity of airliners meant that the airship appeared superseded. They just couldn't compete. And as if that weren't enough in itself, another factor in the decline of the airship was an alarming number of crashes, and this, of course, put people off. Nevertheless, several countries have continued to build smaller airships for various uses, such as naval observation or publicity purposes. In fact, their popularity seems set for a slight revival, and in the past few years there has been renewed attention paid to the possibility of using them to transport cargo. Who knows? Maybe the 21st century will be the age of the airship. Now, if you look at your handouts, you'll see that I've included some information.
That is the end of section 2. You now have half a minute to check your answers. Now turn to section 3. Section 3. First, you have some time to look at questions 21 to 24. Now listen carefully and answer questions 21 to 24.
An interesting aspect of fireworks is that their history tells us a lot about the changing roles of scientists and technicians in Europe. Fireworks were introduced from China in the 13th century. Up to the 16th century, they were generally used for military purposes, with rockets and fire tubes being thrown at the enemy. But they were also sometimes a feature of plays and festivals, where their chief purpose was related to religion. By the 17th century, the rulers of Europe had started using fireworks as a way of marking royal occasions. Technicians were employed to stage spectacular shows which displayed aspects of nature, with representations of the sun, snow and rain. These shows were designed for the enjoyment of the nobility and to impress ordinary people. But fireworks also aroused the interest of scientists, who started to think of new uses for them. After seeing one firework display where a model of a dragon was propelled along a rope by rockets, scientists thought that in a similar way humans might be able to achieve flight, a dream of many scientists at the time. Other scientists, such as the chemist Robert Boyle, noticed how in displays one firework might actually light another, and it occurred to him that fireworks might provide an effective way of demonstrating how stars were formed.
Before you hear the rest of the discussion, you have some time to look at questions 25 to 30. Now listen and answer questions 25 to 30.
Scientists at the time often depended on the royal courts for patronage. But there was considerable variation in the relationships between the courts and scientists in different countries. This was reflected in attitudes towards fireworks and the purposes for which they were used. In London, in the middle of the 17th century, there was general distrust of fireworks among scientists. However, later in the century, scientists and technicians started to look at the practical purposes for which fireworks might be employed, such as using rockets to help sailors establish their position at sea. It was a different story in Russia, where the St. Petersburg Academy of Science played a key role in creating fireworks displays for the court. Here, those in power regarded fireworks as being an important element in the education of the masses, and the displays often included a scientific message. Members of the Academy hoped that this might encourage the royal family to keep the Academy open at a time when many in the government were considering closing it. In Paris, the situation was different again. The Paris Academy of Sciences played no role in staging fireworks displays. Instead, the task fell to members of the Royal Academy of Painting and Sculpture. As in Russia, the work of the technicians who created the fireworks was given little attention. Instead, the fireworks and the spectacle they created were all designed to encourage the public to believe in the supreme authority of the king. However, science was also enormously popular among the French nobility, and fashionable society flocked to demonstrations such as Nicolas Lemery's display representing an erupting volcano. The purpose of scientists was basically to offer entertainment to fashionable society, and academicians delighted in amazing audiences with demonstrations of the universal laws of nature. In the course of the 18th century, the circulation of skills and technical exchange led to further developments. Fireworks specialists from Italy began to travel around Europe, staging displays for many of the European courts. The architect and stage designer Giovanni Servandoni composed grand displays in Paris, featuring colourfully painted temples and triumphal arches. A fireworks display staged by Servandoni would be structured in the same way as an opera, and was even divided into separate acts. Italian fireworks specialists were also invited to perform in London, St. Petersburg, and Moscow. As these specialists circulated around Europe, they sought to exploit the appeal of fireworks for a wider audience, including the growing middle classes. As in the previous century, fireworks provided resources for demonstrating scientific laws and theories, as well as new discoveries, and displays now showed a fascinated public the curious phenomenon of electricity. By the mid-18th century, fireworks were being sold for private consumption. So the history of fireworks shows us the diverse relationships which existed between scientists, technicians, and the rest of society.
That is the end of section 3. You now have half a minute to check your answers. Now turn to Section 4. Section 4. First, you have some time to look at questions 31 to 40. Now listen carefully and answer questions 31 to 40.
Hello, everyone. You've all been given an assignment for your sociology course, which will involve giving a presentation to the rest of the group. And so today, I'm going to be giving you a few tips on how to prepare your presentations. This should help you with your current assignment, but a lot of the principles I'll be putting across will be general principles which will, of course, help you with all your future presentations. So, first of all, the most important thing to consider is your audience, and in this instance, your audience are the other students in your group. There are 3 points to bear in mind. Firstly, you need to ask yourself what they need to know. Secondly, it's useful to consider whether they'll be supportive or not. And thirdly, will it be a small group, say 3 or 4, a moderate gathering of 20 or so people, as for your current assignment, or will there be hundreds of people? Having said all that, what I'm about to tell you will apply equally to any audience. So, how do you structure your presentation? Right at the beginning, you should tell them something that forces them to pay attention. This could be something surprising or even shocking, but it needs to be relevant. After that, you need a list of items or topics showing them what you'll be covering, rather like an agenda. And then the main part of the presentation will follow. This main part will be the detailed information you'll be presenting, and could include facts, statistics, personal experiences, etc. After this, you should summarize what you've presented and close with what I call next steps. For this assignment, you could simply point the group to other sociology reference material. In other cases, you may want to suggest some actions that people can take. Now, what about the design of the slides for your laptop? Well, the important thing here is to be consistent. You need to have the same type of font and use the same color and size for the same elements. For example, all headers need to look the same. All bullet points need to be presented in the same way. And don't just stick to words. Bring the presentation to life by adding graphics. These could be in several forms, such as pictures, flowcharts, diagrams, histograms, and so on. And so let's move on now to presenting. You have your presentation prepared, and you're ready to start. Well, It's important to give a good impression from the start. So take 3 deep breaths, look at the audience, no matter how frightening they may be, and be enthusiastic and energetic. As you go through the presentation, remember to provide some variety in the way you speak. So, for example, you can talk fairly rapidly for information that may be familiar, but then slow down for more unfamiliar sections. And change your tone as you speak. Don't keep it at the same level all the way through. As I mentioned, look at your audience. A good tip is to pick people out and look at them for around 5 seconds. Not looking at the audience gives the impression that you're either not interested in them or terrified of them. Looking too long at one particular person may make them feel rather uncomfortable. There may be points in your presentation that you want your audience to really absorb, and in order to make important points stand out, you may consider adding silence right after these. It will give people time to reflect on what you've just said. Also, you may be presenting complicated ideas or technical details, but try to keep everything as simple as possible. Use simple words and as few as possible. And be clear. If you say something like, "This appears to be," it implies uncertainty. So using weak verbs such as appears, seems, could be, etc., needs to be avoided. I'll just finish off with a few thoughts on questions and interruptions from the audience. You may choose to invite questions from the audience as you go, or ask them to wait until the end. Either way, questions should be encouraged, as it provides you with some feedback on how interested the audience is and how well they're understanding you. When a question is asked, you need to provide an answer that is as accurate as possible. So, initially, my tip is to repeat it. This will ensure you have heard it correctly and will give you a few seconds to gather your thoughts. Interruptions, on the other hand, can be unwelcome, and you may get them for a variety of reasons. It's likely, however, that there's something in your presentation that's unclear or confusing. So my advice is to reduce problems by reading through your presentation beforehand and predicting potential points which could cause interruptions. You may then want to change that part of your presentation, or at least you'll be prepared if someone does interrupt you. Now, do you have any questions?
That is the end of section 4. You now have half a minute to check your answers.